Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Tiff Talks Tech. Today, I am excited because I am joined by Jake Zachariah, who's the VP of Marketing at OneApp. And today, we're going to be talking about solving systemic problems with risk mitigation technology. So, before we really dive in, Jake, can you share a little bit about your background in multifamily and how you got to where you are right now?
Yeah, I am. Again, my name is Jake Zachariah, and I've been in multifamily for, oh gosh, like 19 years now. And I started as a leasing consultant. I mean, this is back in the day before, everyone was searching for their apartment on the internet.
Yeah,
Everyone came with the book, and I got to spend a lot of time with them. So that
yeah,
that was like my favorite part about starting in the industry is I really got to be connected with residents. And it was also like, devastating when they weren't able to move into the community with you. I advanced through my career in like training and marketing. Most recently, I found myself as the VP at OneApp and or VP of marketing at OneApp, and helping to kind of just tell stories at the intersection of like resident outcomes, like optimal resident outcomes and
yeah.
like operator performance.
Yeah, that's awesome. I want to go back to what you said before, like back in the day when they had the book. It's so funny. I was asking my boss the other day, I was like, what did you guys do? Because I've only been in the industry for 10 years. I'm like, what did you guys do before email? What did you guys do before ILSs? What did you guys do? And she's like, well, there was this big book. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it was wild though, because like people would come in, like you get the book that is a really thick book. You'd get it at the grocery store, like a little,
Yeah.
cart in front of the grocery store. And then they'd come in. But like all of the prices, all the floor plans, all the data really, like it was all out of date by the time they got it. So you had to like
Interesting.
go through everything. Now we have like up to the minute. I mean, like you can choose your apartment, do the entire application without even seeing anything all online. Everything from when I started, and again, it was only 19 years ago, but it feels like eons
Yeah.
technologically, because I mean, you had to spend 45 minutes to an hour with the renter, with an applicant, because that was where they got all their information. Like, how's
Yeah.
the community? Like, what floor plans? Let me take a look at them, and the whole application process. Like, you had to go through everything manually, all like real discussions.
Yes, absolutely. And I know things have changed so much over time. And since you've been in the industry for so long, what's the big problem we're trying to solve when it comes to housing accessibility? And over time, how's that been an issue?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that drew me to One App, right?
Yeah.
Is that's the main conversation that we're having. That's the main story that we want to tell, is how that's impacting both sides of the equation, right? So like the big problem that we're trying to solve, at least from our perspective and the way I see it right now, one of the easiest lifts is that we have capable renters that are being denied because we're using outdated criteria, credit, and things just haven't moved. Like when I started, you would only really ever take somebody's W-2 pay stubs to verify their income. And now we've
Mm,
got, side gigs, and, you've got a personal business that you're running, or 1099 income, or gig work.
yeah.
Like all of that creates a lot of stress on both sides, for the renter to verify all that stuff, but also for the management team to like understand if it's enough, did I calculate the right way, all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I think the big problem that we're trying to kind of like help solve with housing accessibility is there's things that are going to take a long time, like building more houses or building more apartments, building or creating laws that like kind of make support systems. Those all
Yeah.
take like a really, really long time. But what we can do in the short term is kind of take a look at how can we give approval assistance that creates more access for both, like creates access for renters to have more availability of housing, and to create more access for property managers to have, a wider availability of quality renters for their community.
Yeah, it's so true. I'm gonna shamelessly plug Umbrello because you mentioned like there's so many different avenues that people are having their income come from. So that's one of the things I know. I work for a fraud solution and that's one of the things that we always look at. But I always say like our two solutions kind of go hand in hand because we
Mhm.
identify the fraudulent ones, the ones that are just trying to get by. But a lot of the time people are just kind of increasing their income to make it look like they have enough to rent there because rents are getting so high and they really can't afford it. And I know that that's kind of the point where you guys come in, right? And you help support them so that they can still get into that apartment, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the, as our as the shameless plug for our one app is like we
Yeah.
are that like lease support system, right? We want the renter to feel like they have a support system so that they don't have to engage in fraud or fudge the
Yeah.
numbers a little bit or like try go through these jump through these hoops to try and fit in. Our data shows and our system shows that they can have support to be a quality and successful renter without having to engage in that and those kinds of activities. So we want to be able to do that in a way that helps the management teams not have to change their criteria because we know it was put there for a reason to
Yeah.
protect themselves, but we don't. That's a longer conversation. It's going to take a lot longer. We can solve that by just being that pipeline in the middle that connects people who we feel are quality renters with
Yeah.
DMCs in a way that they don't have to increase their risk and the renters don't have to engage in fraud or ask for government support or ask for family to co-sign any of that kind of stuff. Like we can just solve both sides of the equation.
Yeah, absolutely. From your perspective, what are one of the or some of the most overlooked and maybe even misunderstood barriers that are keeping people from getting approved right away? I know we said income can be a big one, but is there anything else?
And I think income turns out to be like the underlying cause that causes a lot of problems on the other side, right? So
Mm,
it's like if rents are going up and wages aren't, then that puts immense amount of pressure on the availability of free cash to do things like pay the bill. So, like your credit doesn't look good because, you didn't have enough income at one point or you don't have enough income to overcome that. But there's also other factors too that are related to that, thin or no credit, like, you know, you came around out of college and you don't really have very many, experiences where you've been able to prove that you'll pay the bill. So credit, going by credit is a very difficult factor for that person. Gig income, I mentioned that earlier. That's another one that's really difficult. And also just not understanding what the criteria actually is. I think that's one of the things that we found is a huge challenge is not understanding that criteria, how you fit in that criteria, because every community is different,
yeah.
every company is different, right? You
Yeah.
can be in one area and apply to 50 different apartment communities and have vastly different results in that small little neighborhood. And that right there is like application fee burn. You're like just spending all this money over and over again. And the stigma that comes with that, multiple denials, and you don't really have any information why. So we want a world where that renter has more support to for based on their real income, based on like a real picture of their credit, or to have support where they're lacking that information, but also then just to have like a predictable promise to reduce those barriers for them
Yeah.
and the management side too.
Totally. And I know a lot of the time, those denials and that stigma, it's all framed as that's the renter's problem. But what effect does that have on property managers and owners in the long run?
I mean, it's two sides to the same equation. So, like,
Yeah.
I think if we're sitting in a vacuum and we're only having conversation with other property managers, the conversation evolves to be like, oh, it's a renter problem. But what a lot of managers and owners don't don't see is each avoidable denial turns into more vacancy days. You have to spend more marketing dollars to get another person to come in the door. You already had someone come
Mhm.
in and you deny them. Now you got to pay more money to get another person in, and you have to have you got to pay more, more staffing costs for them to do the other things when you already had somebody who could have been a good renter to begin with come in the door. You're more or vacancy days, more money to spend on marketing and just like longer drawn out periods where you're not dealing with you're not getting the bonus of that occupancy.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of thinking through the broader economic trends and that impact it. What are the things that impact this issue, like inflation, wage stagnation, rising rents, all that stuff? What really drives the issue when it comes to approval challenges?
Yeah, well, like I think the standards tightened
Yeah.
because there were a lot. I mean, like that you mentioned inflation and stagnation and some of these broader economic trends, but there's a lot of other impacts that have happened recently that
Hmm.
again created a lot of downward pressure on the economy,
Yeah.
like COVID and the whole situation around that and all of the losses that were experienced on like both sides of the equation. Again, that put owners, people who owned these properties and people who managed these properties in a really tough position to how do we mitigate against a future situation where we lose some of, lose in that situation again. So they tightened standards and they elevated their rental criteria, but again, it just doesn't match the real income patterns or like the reality is that there's two sides to this equation, and the managers are trying to mitigate risk by tightening these standards, but the renters don't have a situation that enables them to dig out of the same kind of losses as easily or as quickly. You know, they're like trying to balance like how do I get people to move into my apartment community without being at risk for eviction or not paying the bill or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned risk mitigation, and it can kind of sound like a cold financial concept, but it's also the thing that can keep people housed. So, what does effective risk mitigation look like in practice?
Yeah, I think risk mitigation can sound pretty cold, but we're looking for a dignified way to
Hmm.
allow renters to do the thing that is like absolutely required. They're getting shelter. Nobody's going out and buying. Like we're not denying people from buying Porsches. We're we're
Yeah.
we're denying people from housing, and that's like a human requirement. Like it's a thing we need to survive. So what we're trying to do is trying to find the balance between the very real need to mitigate risk on the manager side, uh, in multifamily, with providing a dignified way to give people approvals, and not just consistently deny. Denial should be like our last choice for risk mitigation. There should be a whole slew of that. Again, that just opens the door to more challenges. The government has stepped in and created deposit caps and fees that they can't charge and all this kind of stuff. And again, that puts downward pressure on the manager side. So like, it really is a tough conversation of how you can get more approvals that benefit both sides of the equation in a dignified way that also again doesn't increase risk for the PMC.
Right, absolutely. All that kept coming to mind when you and I were talking about this behind the scenes is like I know somebody who was a victim of domestic abuse, and their partner had gone and ruined, like they were not paying the rent when they thought they were paying the rent. And so her credit was shot, and she needs a place for her and her kids to live. And if she had a solution like this, she wouldn't be getting denial after denial for her and her family because she's out of that situation. She personally is not a risk, but had no idea that she was being taken advantage of. So it's like stories like this are the reason why solutions like yours are really amazing and can really come in and bridge that gap for the people who need it the most.
Yeah, and that it's a really sad story and shows you something that's almost completely out of someone's control.
Right.
Nobody wants to get into a car accident. Nobody wants to be a victim of domestic abuse. Nobody
Right.
wants to lose their job. But these situations that are outside of our control happen.
Mhm.
We wanted to be a kind of like a fintech, prop tech kind of solution that
Yeah.
again doesn't just support the renter because they do need that support, but we wanna do it a way that balances the needs of the management side too. And I think that's where the broadening the description of kind of like what technology can do is
Yeah.
to come in. And disrupt in a positive way, in a way
Yeah.
that balances the equation, but also is one of those very rare kind of like win-win-win situations. Like, the
Hmm.
renter wins, the property manager wins, and we win because we get to be in a business that is expanding access to housing. So very, very few times in my life have I ever seen an actual win-win-win situation,
Yeah.
and we get to work for that. But I think that all goes back to making sure that you're finding a solution or a workflow that allows you to, solve your problems with dignity in a dignified way for
Hmm.
all parts of the equation, and not just to point the finger at someone and say it's your problem or you're the fault, but really just say like, this is a problem. We need to solve it because it's causing challenges on both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, it is one of the pieces of the puzzle. Are there other pieces that really have to be in place in order for actual progress to happen?
Well, I think again, we need to have a larger conversation about like what does that housing workflow look like? How are we getting people access into housing that exists? How are we filling up those units for the management side? We need to have those top level kind of like government changes for zoning and policies and laws that again are factoring in both sides of the equation. And until we can get there, we're coming up with a solution that supports the lease, that supports both sides from that way. But I think the first part for real progress to happen needs to be that we need to start having this conversation and
Yeah.
including the renters or advocates for renters in that equation, because we can't do that in a vacuum in the multifamily industry. We can't go to conferences and just talk about risk mitigation. We have to go
Yeah.
to those conferences and talk about risk mitigation with renters and understand how, because it's a symbiotic relationship. We're here together. We don't exist in the multifamily industry without renters, and they don't have housing without us to provide it for them.
Yeah.
So how do we change that conversation to make real progress and understand what the real levers are that we can pull?
Yeah. And since we are talking about, standing behind the renter, really advocating for them, we also know that the other side of it is the operator, and we don't want to put them in a worse position. Can you dive into a little bit how your solution really helps prevent that and it doesn't put them in a worse spot? I know you said it's a win win win. How is it a win win win?
Yeah. So the renter, obviously gets the support, and we can get to help them get like approval assistance, right? So we can
Yeah.
do that. But it doesn't mean none of that means anything if the operators or the managers, the owners feel like they're getting the short end of the stick.
Hmm.
So we wanted to find a way that helped mitigate their concerns, their pains, and their risk without, having, just like a bad taste in their mouth from this solution.
Yeah.
So we worked so that managers can keep the criteria and even add like portfolio level support. So they can take this and use it at one property that they're struggling with. They can use it across their entire organization, but you need to find a way that allows the managers to not have to change their entire business model just to accept, right? And to give them a predictable at positive results, right? So that's another thing that we're pretty proud of is like high percent, like high nine or low 90s% of successful renters that make it to the end of lease without any problems at all. It's the proof.
Yeah.
The proof is in the pudding that like we gave you a renter and we showed you, and they were a successful renter, like low 90s
Yeah.
percent of success without having any problems or claims or defaults. And then when there are defaults, to come in and have quick reimbursements for any of those losses. So if they lost out on rent, they lost out on damages or legal fees, for the very small number of people that do have those defaults, then we come in and we fulfill that promise. We make them whole, and we do it quickly. So we don't play the insurance game because we're not insurance, but we don't play the insurance game where we delay and defend and deny or any of that kind of stuff. So you'll get reimbursements within 10 business days for those claims, and we also do it in a way where it literally costs the property nothing.
Yeah.
So they don't have to pay for a portfolio insurance policy. They don't have to pay out these fees. They don't, whatever. They just refer people to us. We run them through our criteria. If they are a good fit for us, the renter pays the fee, and then we support their lease, up to 24 months. So that's kind of, again, like making it so the property manager doesn't have to change anything about the way they do business, but also doesn't have to worry about some future uh, you know, other shoe to drop because they didn't read the fine print.
Right.
We support the lease, we give them good renters, and then if something happens where there's a default, we come in and we fulfill our promise to support that lease.
Yeah, I love it. I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk about risk mitigation, holding the hand of fraud prevention. I know you and I kind of chatted about this, and not to just sit here and shamelessly poke, but um, housing accessibility can go hand in hand with fraud prevention, even though a lot of the time it can be seen as opposite priorities. How do you see them working together?
So I think that risk mitigation and fraud prevention are literally complementary
Yeah,
topics.
yeah,
Because the only reason that people engage in fraud is because they don't have a solution available to them to do
exactly.
the right thing, right?
Right.
And I'm sure there's probably people out there who believe, they're no, they're engaging in fraud because they're bad people. And I'm sure there are bad actors out there, a
Yeah.
small percent, but they are more than likely the exception to the rule. Most people want to do the right thing. They want to apply. They want to get an approval. They want the leasing consultants to tell them, congratulations, you're approved. That was my favorite part of the job when I was a leasing consultant because I just spent like 45 minutes, an hour with someone. And then when they got approved, I was like, congratulations, you just got approved. Welcome home. Like that's the
Yeah.
the best result. That's exactly what everyone wants. So if they know they're not going to get that, then they're going to do everything they can to get that feeling, to get that status, to get that approval. So I think what we can do is, risk mitigation solutions, tech solutions, and fraud prevention
Yeah.
tech solutions, both in the property tech space for multifamily, can work together. You can use them in tandem, and I think managers should use them in tandem, right? Like you should mitigate risk and prevent fraud, but that can't be the only solution is to deny and prevent people from getting in. You should give them
Yeah.
a solution that allows to get in on their own merits or in a qualified way. We can,
Right.
with the risk mitigation side of it, we can approve more qualified renters and give them better signals, but we don't have to. That's not excluding fraud prevention.
Yeah,
We're
and I'm
just
kind of
adding that third option.
yeah, I'm thinking about the workflow, and like the workflow that we typically recommend is that you have somebody come in the office, you verify their ID and make sure that that ID is legitimate. And so I think about that like before they even tour, you're checking that to make sure they're real. And then the income fraud will come in later, but you know that that's a real person and you've already jumped over that hoop. So then by the time you've toured and you're going through the income piece and you might be seeing things pop up with that, you've already taken out one piece of that and you're diving into
Mhm.
the next. So I do think they really go hand in hand because as you go through the steps of the fraud prevention, you are then going through the steps of getting that person home to where they need to
Correct.
be.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to talk about, changing industry mindsets. There's a stigma around risky renters. How can we start to rethink what risky actually means?
Yeah. No, I love this question because, again, I think it's one of those side effects, those like negative side effects of
Yeah.
having the conversation in a vacuum. We call them risky renters now, and that's not what it is. Risk is a concept, and we don't avoid risk by denying. We manage risk by finding solutions that help us achieve our financial goals without exposing us to the negative side of that possibility. So we want to reduce risk, we want to manage risk, but we can't avoid risk. So I think rethinking that starts, the conversation has to start again about like reframing what that looks like. It's not like people aren't trying to engage in fraud, they're
Yeah.
trying to get into an apartment. So if you give them a way to engage or to engage positively to get in that into that approval, then that's managing the risk. Your fraud prevention does the same thing. You're managing risk
Yeah.
by reducing the number of opportunities that somebody has to give you fake documents or appear as someone else or whatever it is. But I
Yeah.
think the other thing too is to like make sure that whatever solutions that you're looking at are also helping you achieve your goals. So you can't think of it like insurance because you've got somebody who defaults on their lease and yeah, you've got the insurance that like backfills, but then you've got 6 months to go before you even get that
Yeah.
payout. Or they like, oh no, you forgot to put a period at the end of this sentence in my document, so the whole claim
Yeah.
is denied, type thing. Like you need to work with high quality, high value partners who are going to help you manage your business, but are doing it in a dignified way, because again, that shows that you as the manager are trying to have this good relationship by managing that risk.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any assumptions that you hear often about why people are getting denied? I don't know. Do you think that any of those assumptions you hear may not actually be the full story?
For sure. I mean, I've
Yeah.
heard it my whole career is that if we lower the criteria, or if we loosen the criteria, it's going to cause more bad debt. It's going to cause more defaults.
Yeah.
It's going to cause more evictions. We're going to be letting in, bad renters in. And the data just doesn't support that. Like
Yeah.
you can go through and see numerous studies that have been done for decades now that show that, uh, like a majority of Americans are one financial disaster away from being in a situational homeless situation.
Yeah.
So they like a car accident, you have a medical episode, you lose your job, like
Mhm.
all those things are completely out of their control. And that's not a bad renter. That's a renter that something happened. So loosening the criteria doesn't mean you're going to have more bad debt. It's not going to mean that you have more evictions, because again, we're talking about introducing a solution
Right.
that mitigates. And again, because we're talking about change management too. We're not just talking about how to like solve this problem. We're also talking about how to change mindsets that I've heard for 19 years now, is that if you loosen that criteria or you lower the criteria, that you're going to have more bad debt. You're going to carry more bad debt. You're going to have more evictions or whatever. But this is a way, at least OneApp is a way that you can keep those standards. You can add lease support, and that helps change the conversation to bring managers and multifamily industry back to the table to start having a real conversation about why the system is a little outdated.
Yeah, absolutely. If we don't address these issues in the next 10 years, what does it look like if we don't try to get rid of the systemic approval barriers that exist today?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have, if we don't try to remove some of these systemic approval barriers, what we're looking at is a world where fewer people are in apartments, having
Mhm.
to pay a higher rent amount to meet the needs and the goals of the owners, of those property owners. So rent is going up, occupancy is going down, which again, every renter then that moves out or has a financial issue is going to cause even larger swings in occupancy and vacancy loss. It's going to be lots more marketing spend to get people, because they're going to be a lot pickier. They're paying more rent for this apartment, and they're going to be pickier. So you're going to have to spend a lot more money to convince them. And I think the longer tail of that is that creates these like larger equity gaps,
Yeah.
that it keeps more people in unstable housing situations. It's more people renting from somebody who rents from somebody who, I mean, that's another thing that
Right.
you're even thinking about, is
Yeah.
like the second level of fraud. I mean, you've got the first level of fraud that most managers think about is like someone's defrauding me to try and get in the apartment. But then you're going to create a situation where someone can't get in there, but somebody who can get in there will get in there. And then they'll turn around and release that apartment to
Yeah.
someone else.
I'm thinking like
And again,
Airbnb without approval, or like
yeah,
even thinking about getting roommates without having them on the lease. Like people are going to try
100%.
to cram into apartments. If they can't afford it, then they're going to try to, you know, do what they
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, I mean, if we think that managers have a tough time trying to find someone's chihuahua that they hide in the closet every time they have a maintenance agreement, I
Yeah.
mean, they're going to be literally hiding 3 or 4 people in each bedroom,
Yeah.
where they're like stacked up with bunk beds, because that's what it costs to rent the unit, uh, or whatever. And again, those are long tail extrapolations of like what that problem
Right.
will be, but it's absolutely a very real future on the horizon if we don't have these conversations, if we don't start solving these problems.
Yeah. Absolutely. For people listening who work in our industry, what's one step they could do today to help make a difference and make things a little more accessible?
I think it would be honestly to start pushing to have those conversations
Yeah.
internally and then and also externally. So we need to have the conversations in our management teams. We need to come to like a very real like idea. We cannot paint a picture where the renter is the bad person. We have to
Yeah.
paint a picture where we are in a symbiotic relationship and we need the renter. We need the renter to be supported, and then
Hmm.
we need to have external conversations in our trade shows and conferences. And we also need to have more legislative conversations where we are supporting the renter, where we
Yeah.
are creating, governmental change and legislative change that allows the renter and the property owner and manager to come to the table with equal standing and equal footing. If we don't see this relationship as equal and symbiotic, we fall into this again, this like little echo chamber where we're painting the picture of someone else as the bad guy,
Yeah.
and that's the literal person we need for our business to stay afloat. That's
Yeah.
just it's wild. So I think the biggest impact is just to have those conversations internally, externally, and then again in a legislative capacity so that we could try to solve this problem together.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. Well, before we close out, I do have a bonus question for you. And this is something I ask every single one of my podcast guests. It does not have to be related to this topic, but do you have a tech tool that you love in your everyday life that you use all the time?
Yeah, actually, it is related to work and it is related to business. I was literally just having a conversation with one of my favorite people in our team advocating for it, and it is Fellow. It's a
Mm,
meeting AI note taking software solution. So I literally use it like every workday. It connects with your Google Calendar. So like anytime you have a meeting, it'll connect. It
yeah,
allows you to like get the agenda. You can like type the whole agenda in, and then it's got an AI note taker that will pick out the action items that maybe you forgot in your notes, and it'll add
yeah,
it to the end, so like you never forget of the thing that you like agreed to do or somebody told you needed to happen. Like you always get that like follow-up email that says, hey, remember to do this thing. So it saved my life so many
yeah.
times. Love it. It's one of my favorite things. I advocated.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining. Where can people go to learn more about what you're doing and connect with you directly?
Yeah, so if anybody wants to connect with me directly, you can go to pretty much any of the platforms. I'm most often on LinkedIn, and you can just search my like username or whatever. It's Jake Z, or you can search my name, Jake Zachariah. And I'm also helping run our company page for OneApp. You can go and follow us on LinkedIn and kind of learn a little bit more about our solution and how we're helping to create a barrier-free housing future.
Love it. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it and hope everybody got something from this.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for the time.